Welcome, everyone. My name is Maureen Antunes, president of the Vancouver ACM SIGGRAPH chapter and Spark CG Society, and I want to welcome you all to this very special conversation for Spark FX 2023. Very, very pleased to have a part of the VFX team from Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. So I'm going to start by introducing our speakers. Yes, say hello, everyone.
Hi.
We're going to start with Zak Stoltz, our visual effects supervisor. Jeff Desom, a VFX artist.
Hello.
And Ethan Feldbau, our lead VFX artist and designer.
Hello.
Before we talk about the movie specifically, I thought we would start by talking a little bit about your individual careers and how you guys came into VFX, because one of the things that's become really clear over the course of the last year as the film has been out, and you've been doing a lot of press and talking about the making of the film, is that you're not all necessarily come from a background of visual effects. You're all filmmakers in your own right who have made your own projects, and VFX feels like it almost came out of necessity. So maybe Zak, starting with you, can you talk a little bit about your career prior to this and how you came and like your journey through VFX?
Yeah, so I think we do often get pegged as people who aren't professional visual effects artists, which is interesting because we have worked a lot in visual effects, but it's true. We didn't necessarily all come at it from a place where we wanted to be visual effects artists. That was never, I think, on any of our radars as a profession that we were actively working towards. So when I went to college, I decided that I wanted to be a director. Originally, I was thinking I'd be a producer. That was after past thinking I was going to be an engineer. It was all sorts of crazy stuff. But I realized, I like directing, I like storytelling, and so I realized that there were stories that I wanted to tell and things that I wanted to make that I didn't know how to make because I didn't have the technical skills to pull them off. So I remember the first thing that I needed to learn visual effects for was a short film called In Frame that I made in college. And the whole concept of it was there's someone who's walking through the frame of the movie, but then they run into the side of it, and then they run into the top of it, and then the top breaks, and they have to deal with the physical frame of the film, and that becomes the antagonist. And so I was like, well, how do I do this? And so I had to learn After Effects for that. And then that led to a path of realizing that it was not only something that I could use as a storytelling device, but also as something that I could use to help support myself after college in post-production, just so that I could pay the bill, so I could pursue directing. Because after getting into music videos, which I did in like 2012, after making a short film that was also visual effects heavy, that was something where I wasn't making a lot of money. I think everyone here has done music videos. They know that music videos don't really pay very well as a director, because you're always throwing in your rate to make sure that it's as good as it can be, because you're working with small budgets where you would only be making $500 or $1,000 anyway for all this work, so you might as well just put it back into the project. But over the course of time, I worked a lot with the Daniels on visual effects. They were actually the ones who, them and Jonathan Wong, helped me get signed as a music video director. But I just kept on doing visual effects and working with them, and then working independently. And then gradually the balance shifted from doing lots of visual effects and a little bit of directing, because I was only getting a little bit of directing, and then all the way up through 2018, I was almost exclusively directing, and I was doing visual effects on my own stuff. But that was, I had kind of transitioned away from the visual effects and into directing. And then I made a feature-length digital series that Ethan worked on called Break Karate, and then I was waiting for that to come out, and then I got asked to be the VFX supervisor and Everything Everywhere, and all of a sudden it went right back. So that's kind of how I got here.
Ethan, can you talk a little bit about your journey, since Zak mentioned you? Let's go to you next.
Sure. So I might have been the only one who, from a very young age, kind of set out to do magic and visual effects. For me, it was always going to be stage magic or movies, at least starting in third grade, when I had a teacher who was an assistant in a stage magic show. I went to college in Boston at Emerson with the Daniels and with Larkin. And I hopped onto visual effects because I fell in love with the school's optical printer. So I was doing a lot of effects work the analog way. And when I graduated, I got my first job at a commercial post house in Boston. So suddenly I had just gotten my academic education, but I got my sort of commercial post education in a full service house where I was a telecine assistant doing a lot of film transfers and learning how to color on DaVinci 2K, if you can recall back then. And also learned the in and outs of their machine room, their NAS, how to be an assistant editor, which I was never a great editor. I was much better at visual effects and image making. Anyways, the recession happened and decided I would join all my friends in moving out to Los Angeles. And that included Larkin Seipel, that included, at the time, I didn't know the Daniels incredibly well. We had only just met because we both had our films in the Emerson Film Festival. And I had my student film, which was a lot of optical printer work and a lot of art direction. So anyways, we all decided to move out to LA where people start working on music videos. And I primarily became a production designer for a certain social group and facilitated art department for lots of directors, including the Daniels on some of their work. Always kept visual effects in my back pocket because there's a reality people are not spending money to do large practical sets or tons of practical effects. And there became a tipping point for me where I was more comfortable and happier doing visual effects than I was working in production. And that coincided with the starting of this movie.
And Jeff, how about you?
So, I mean, it's been a kind of a similar journey in terms of we all grew up, you know, with the advent of digital nonlinear technologies, and you know, I remember getting my hands on one of the first iMacs that had iMovie on it, and very early on I started to use Photoshop on like you know, frame by frame basis, like exporting stuff from Photoshop at like frame by frame just to animate anything. And then I learned After Effects after that. And yeah, like I you know, always, like the other guys, wanted to be a director and started to do my own projects, which became increasingly more ambitious as time went on. And I remember I made this one movie that took me 4 years to make during school breaks. And it was sort of my film school where I learned all the in and outs. I'd do camera on it, the editing. I'd build a set in my parents' garage. I would, yeah, I would do the sound even on it. So it was like my you know, I sort of taught myself pretty much like a little bit of every department, but I did realize the immense power that came with VFX and just being able to enhance what you shot and replace, you know, the sky or just clean up some stuff just to give it like that little bit of extra cinematic magic. I don't know how to call it, but just to, you know, to make your mini DV camera look like it's just that little bit better, you know, that little bit more cinematic. And so that movie ended up winning. So I'm from Luxembourg, small country in Europe, and that movie ended up winning the Luxembourg Film Award for Best Short Film that year, where it came out, and that sort of propelled me to keep going, and also you know, to sort of feel it gave me the courage and like allowed me to go on, because I come from a family of winemakers, and they wanted me to, you know, continue in the family business. And so it was like a good sort of a reason to, you know, feel validated. And I went to film school in England, and I did a few like more projects. One project in particular was a complete was entirely animated on the computer. It was this burning piano falling down the Empire State Building, and the Daniels saw it just when they opened their Vimeo account. And it was, I think they always tell me it was their very first like on Vimeo. And then they hit me up and they asked me to do VFX on a music video of theirs, and that's how I met them, through this whole Vimeo community and the Vimeo Awards. And yeah, I kept on directing, you know, same as the others, doing music videos and just because I also never had the intention to go into purely VFX based career, because it's like I didn't want to be sitting behind a computer all the time, and it is just a very lonesome business, and we're all, I think, very social creatures and kind of crave the interaction, and so that's what, like, it's nice to be on set and all that. But yeah, at some point Zach asked me to join the movie, and I was let's do it.
Well, I think this is pretty interesting because so you've all sort of been circling this little community for a number of years.
Yeah.
And Zach, it seems like you're the one that kind of got the ball rolling when it came to actually getting the group together on Everything Everywhere All at Once. So let me start with you by asking, when did you first get wind of the project? When did it come to you? And what was your first thought when you saw the scope of it? And then how much time and budget you were going to have to pull this off?
Yeah, it was really scary. I think I'd heard about it, years ago. Now it's 2023, but I came on the project in late 2019. That's when they asked me if I wanted to help them out and be the visual effects supervisor. I think that, but yeah, I'd heard about it a few years before that because they'd been working on it for a while. And we were friends at that point. Like I didn't really get into like how we started working together, but basically I introduced myself randomly at an event, and then I said, if you ever need help, let me know. And then I made it, and then I didn't hear from them. I made a short film and sent it to them, and they're like, oh, we need help. Like, we know that you can do this. Can you help us? And so I just ended up basically like helping them finish one of their short films called Pockets. And then like, I just, worked with them for like a year straight, basically on music videos. We became friends through that. So after their first movie, Swiss Army Man, which they did, they did visual effects themselves, but then they also worked with a larger post house on that. And they wanted to get back to their roots in a sense and do things more like they did music videos, because they wanted it to be that more personal thing. They wanted to be able to work with people who they trusted artistically to help them, achieve the things that they were hoping for, because they were going to be so busy on everything. And it was such a big, ambitious project that they needed people who were more collaborators and less just, hands, doing things. So that, they pitched it to me as something where, we're going to do visual effects the way that we have done it before. We're just going to need to scale it up. And because of that, it was daunting, but it was also not, it wasn't like they were saying, hey, there's all these things that you have no clue how to do, and we don't know how to do it either. Can you figure all of that stuff out? It was more of we have a sense of how we want to do this, and we want to make sure that we're shooting this in a way that will work for visual effects, because they also do a lot of visual effects. They're the exact same as we are in the sense that they learned it out of necessity. And so we have this shared language that we speak, and we have that shorthand from working together. And so they would never shoot something on set where they were just like, okay, we'll figure this out in post because we have no idea. There were certain things that we did have to figure out in post because things would change. Yes. And that was a part of the editing process and assembling things. But it was crazy. It was very scary. It was not a lot of money for what needed to be done. And so it did feel like it was falling on me to figure out, how do we scale up this small thing into something big, but still keep it contained and something that, we can make work without totally like going crazy over budget, but still having all of this like boundless creativity. So it's kind of like wanting to have your cake and eat it too. And we figured out how to break the universe and make that happen. But yeah, it was scary. I was worried. I was stressed out the entire time.
So before we get into some of the logistics, how did you bring Ethan and Jeff and the rest of the team on board? Did you have to, was it a big sell for you guys when Zach approached you on with this project?
No, it was an easy sell. In a way, it was a return to working with friends that I had worked with before, because, I had been a production designer for the Daniels, and I facilitated their project as Jason Kisvardi, the production designer of EEAAO did. So it was like, okay, why not come back to you? Why not work on this project? Because I know Jason, I know Larkin so well. And what a great idea to take somebody who has helped in your past aesthetic and have them come aboard just to make sure that the film aesthetically matches what it is that you are going for. I mean, it was a pretty easy sell. It just took a lot of cleverness to look at that budget and think about how we were going to actually pull it off. And we did, but it took some thought. I mean, and then Jeff came on. I guess, Jeff, I'll let you share your end of the story, but this all comes down to the Tabanaki chef shot, which was Jeff's introduction to the film, which wound up being this beautiful piece of 2D animation. But we used to have morning meetings where Zach would talk to Ben, who's unfortunately not with us right now, and I, about the day's work. And this shot came up. And Zach's original approach for the shot was to have a 3D simulation of food being juggled by the chef. And I had brought up that I thought we could do it in 2D, and could we do a test? And I couldn't sell Zach on that. So he wound up saying, I'm going to find another artist to try it in 3D. That artist was Jeff. And Jeff was like, hey, you know what? This could be done in 2D. And so it actually became a Rosetta Stone for realizing that different effects didn't all have to be done in 3D. And then, Jeff, I'll let you take away how you came to being the Tabanaki master.
Yeah, I remember it, looking at the shot, and yeah, 3D seemed like a really cumbersome way of doing it. And what I ended up doing very quickly was like, okay, I drew a few vegetables very roughly with my mouse in After Effects Paint and animated them. And I could see very quickly, once you switch the motion blur on and you sort of had the physics right, you animated it, that it could maybe work. And I sent a first version of the shot to everyone, and I wasn't sure, I really wasn't sure if they were going to like it, but everybody was very enthusiastic about it. And then, yeah, I just tweaked it a little bit, and there was not a few more shots of that. And I think then we were off to the races, and they were like, oh, do you want to do this shot and this shot? And then, yeah, it became, yeah, before I knew it, I was on the project full time.
It was a situation where we had, because like I found myself in a bit of an interesting position where not only was I, supervising the creative work that was being done, but I was also working as an artist, and then I, was also the visual effects producer, which I didn't realize. I thought that was just because, this is the first feature that I've been a visual effects supervisor, and it just won Best Picture. It's crazy, but like it's, that I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll deal with the budget and all this stuff, and I'll do all this stuff too, because it is, based on the past work that we've all done. It's always wearing a bunch of different hats, and so it was trying to figure out how to keep it small while still like, keeping the creative up. And so Ethan's totally right. Like very early on, I was in a state of, we need to make sure we don't go over budget. And so when he proposed that, I was like, you have so many things that are on your plate that I need you to focus on. I'm going to just pass it off to someone else so that we don't have to even worry about this. It was less about, I think, can it be done this way? It was more of a thinking of, is that the most efficient way to do that? And so when Jeff came on and it became the most efficient way, then it's like, all right, yeah, like no problem. But I was very focused on efficiency in that early part because we had so much to get through. And it was like I didn't know what our runway was basically for how much we could spend and how much time we could put on stuff. But as the process continued, we basically brought people on as needed, and where we had skills that we needed to fill that we didn't currently have, or when we were just overloaded ourselves and needed to, be moving faster. But it really was just about keeping things small and contained so that I could continue to work on shots without having to like sacrifice some of that time to oversee a ton of artists and a bunch of work, because we just didn't have, we didn't have the infrastructure to bring in a ton of artists. And also it would just become unfeasible for me to actually work on the film while supervising that many people. So it was weird. It was an interesting balancing act, but I guess we figured it out.
Well, and that's the thing. In hindsight, it's like, well, how did we do it? But in the moment, this is just an extension of what you've been doing for the last however many years that you've been in the industry. Before we get into some of the the production side of things, like and the specifics on prioritizing shots and pipeline, I wanted to ask you, Zach, a little bit about you were aware of the project very early on, and you knew that the approach was going to be very hands-on and very much in keeping with the previous work that Daniel's had done, which always feels like it's a community effort, like almost like all filmmaking is, but even more so, it feels like it's a group of friends that are all invested in getting something done. That seems to be the spirit of it all, and it always has sort of felt that way. So, with that in mind and knowing how much work needed to be done from the script, and with them, they have a very good handle on VFX. Can you talk a little bit about like the prep before you even started working on the VFX, like the pre-production that went into the planning and making sure that you have the shots to begin with, and that you weren't causing like that they weren't making additional work for you that you wouldn't be able to get to. Can you talk a little bit about that process and the conversations around that and the planning, the pre-planning that went in before they even started shooting?
Yeah, so there was a lot of prep on my side. I was using a Airtable, which is what we ended up using for all of our visual effects shot tracking later, but I did a full breakdown. I was going into like all the questions that I had, everything that could be visual effects or practical effects, just like really breaking it all down, and then just making my suggestions and notes, and then talking with them about it. We actually didn't end up talking about it as much as I would have liked at the beginning, but it was because they were just so busy and they had so much to do in so many different departments. But I think that part of that was also just trusting that it would be okay, and that the fact that I was keeping track of all this stuff meant that when I was on set and I was watching this, I could kind of just be a little more hands off, because being on set with them is crazy. Like it is not a slow pace, like, oh, we're just gonna like, shoot a page a day. It's kind of like, all right, we have like 90 shots to get today. Let's go do this. I remember specifically there was one time when we were on set, like for the IRS finale, and there was we needed to know if like how big the blue screen we were going to put up behind, the actors were for the finale. And I was just like, well, what's the shot? I don't even know what the shot is. And they're like, you got to decide now. Like, let's just throw this one up there and like, see what happens. And and so if you see in some of our visual effects breakdowns where we have like one blue screen and then a smaller one that's next to it that isn't quite the same color, it's because the shot was framed up. I'm like, can we just get another one in there real quick? Like, so there was a lot of that sort of thing. But it's the thing is, all those shots were designed in such a way that it wasn't the end of the world when that was what was going on, because they understood kind of the general idea of what was going to happen, and it wasn't, we knew that we could finesse it later. So there was a lot of prep, but it got to the point where it would just be every day going in, being very vigilant, and like, okay, these are the things that are on the list for today. You guys feel good about all these things? Is there anything that you're unsure about? Is there anything you need from me, or that you want me to like pay special attention to? Because it really was a collaborative effort in that sense. So I had a lot of that prep that I had already done, and so I was I was like right there with them, making sure that every time that, you know, or most of the time when they were doing anything that could be visual effects, I was keeping an eye on that, making little suggestions as needed, but mostly just trying to like make it easier for them to just do their thing, because that's, you know, when they're in the zone, they got to move fast and they just have a very particular way of working. So I think that this is kind of the ethos that has developed around, I think, our group as well, for any sort of project, which is that we're there to help the filmmakers do whatever they want to do in the way that they want to do it. Whereas I think some, you know, I don't know this for sure, but I assume that like there's other bigger visual effects companies where they have a specific way that they want to do things because it fits in with their pipeline. Whereas we try to take more of a holistic approach and create a bespoke pipeline for things and make sure that it's just serving the filmmakers' needs, even if it isn't the most conventional thing. So that's yeah, it's a long-winded way of saying, yes, there was lots of prep, but it was not the most conventional, and it was maybe a little more chaotic than some other productions would be, but you know, that comes with the territory.
When did your pre-production start before they actually started shooting? How long did you have?
Oh, I don't even remember.
November of 2019 was when we came on.
Yeah, Ethan came on and helped me out with a bunch of stuff early on. We were there were a lot of things involving the multiverse, like the multiverse map and the verse jumping and all the aesthetics of that that we wanted to develop. And so we did a bunch of that so that we could have things on set that were there as placeholders and have a general sense of like anytime there was something that they were doing on a screen, we kind of knew what it generally was going to be. And that actually didn't change too much from production. There were some color things that changed on the map, but other than that, it was the design itself was pretty consistent. And that was just a part of like talking with Dan Kwan a bunch, like in between, you know, prep meetings, just going into a room and like drawing on a whiteboard and being like, oh, it's this, and then this happens, and you know, so, and then being able to develop that language from there. So we prepped a lot of that stuff. I'm trying to remember what other assets we were preparing beforehand.
I mean, I could say Zach and I had a sort of unique and complementary performance at the very beginning of it. So we didn't have that long pre-production. I'm sure it was like 3 months, November, December, January, no, 2 months. So what was happening is while Zach was doing much of the technical components of preparing the film, I was helping visualize some of the aesthetic components. So I would be, for example, coming up with designs for the Multiverse or Alphaverse phone app. And while Zach would be in meetings with the Daniels working, you know, on specific details, I'd be able to just remotely send an art. The art would be viewed, notes would be given. And this wound up growing into how production went, because for the most part, Zach was the singular VFX representative on set for the most part. There were a few days where some more people were there. And then remotely, I would be, say, designing concepts or sketches or anything that would help the Daniels, and we just send it to set and it would be viewed with Zach and the Daniels. And suddenly you could have the art and the tech all being handled by a very small number of people in a somewhat remote way. This is even before lockdown. So I guess the best way to answer your question is there was some pre-pro, but we had this synergistic way of designing and developing the visual effects at the same time that they were shooting.
And did you start on the post-production as you were shooting, or had you shot everything and then you started with VFX?
Yeah, and you can go into this more, Zach, but it was like live theater. Things were happening all at once. It was never that they shot the movie, paused, edited the movie, locked it, paused, did visual effects. The editorial developed along with the visual effects, and we would often be able to put in temp effects or rough effects to audition while they were cutting the film, while they were still shooting. I mean, it was just like the movie title, everything happening all at once. And that's a little unique. I mean, I guess you start the edit as soon as you go into production these days, but we were really doing visual effects, even for scenes that were eventually cut or drastically changed. We were doing them while they were filming, so they could see the movie come together.
Yeah, there was just a handful of, I think after production wrapped, there was a pause, but that was also like we got shut down because of COVID, with 1 day left of filming, but that actually ended up being fine because the last day was a big green screen day. So we just had more time to figure out, okay, well, what elements do we actually need? And then they went and got those later. But yeah, I think there was a bit of a pause, and then we, like Ethan said, started getting into, there were specific temp effects that they wanted to have, so we do that. So there was a lot of like starting and stopping on our side, but we had a starting and stopping, which was a little bit easier with a smaller team. It's not like we had like a big production house where we were all hanging out, waiting, and just not making any money. It was, I mean, that it still was like, yeah, we had to go down and come up, but it made it easier with a small team. But yeah, lots of random temp effects, and then like, we'd just be working on a lot of research and development stuff for the bagel, and then temping things in, and then like just throwing a bunch of stuff. I think one of the things that I remember was there were a lot of scenes where they were trying to explain verse jumping and this crazy concept of like accessing things from other universes. And initially it was just a big long voiceover and just talking, but then they realized that they needed to have something more visual to help communicate some of these things. And so we ended up, doing a bunch of little tests. I did little animation mock-ups with no stylization at all, but using all those, the base layer of, like, this is what the multiverse map looks like. Here are just some ideas of like what the text could say. And I'd put together these tests and send them in. And then I remember getting like another cutback where that thing that I had created was chopped up in like 4 different places, and then they would like cut it together and move it over here. So it was just like providing them with like the raw footage that they could cut in and do things. And then we would take that and then figure out, okay, so now we've got like these few pieces that were not previously connected to each other. Let's figure out how to, dynamically link them together and then make it a little more fluid and help tell the story in that way. So that's an example of where we really did use visual effects and to help finesse the story. And another place was there was a whole scene where Jamie Lee Curtis's character was behind Stephanie Shu's character for this scene, and they cut that scene drastically, but then it didn't make sense for Jamie Lee Curtis to be there, so we just had to like remove her entirely. So I remember when Paul was like, I think Paul or Daniel, one of the two of them, just said, hey, would this be crazy? We don't want to have to do reshoots, but just let us know. And at this point we were like, I don't know, this was more than halfway through visual effects, and I was like, let's see what we can do. And so I like did a little test and then told Jeff, hey, Jeff, can you get rid of her for this whole thing? Thanks. And we made it work. It ended up looking great.
That's a whole month of my time went into that. It was really, I spent a lot of time in that corridor.
I think you're hitting a very important visual effects point that's special to this film. Once upon a time, if you had a film and it was having trouble communicating its story, you'd go have a reshoot. You'd go write some voiceover. You'd come up with some way to go out and practically collect what was missing from the film. And because of the Daniels working process, and because we were always part of the film coming together, we were permitted to kind of voice thoughts and opinions on how we could make ideas come through clearer. The Daniels had test screenings. As Zach pointed out, some people found like the pseudoscience of describing verse jumping very confusing when it was only given as sort of, spoken word. And it was like, well, you know what? You've already written into the script that Alpha Evelyn has made all this computer software. Let's bring it to the forefront and let that tell that story. And so suddenly VFX hops on and they help with story and they help the audience understand more clearly. In the case of Jamie in the hallway, we had a scene that was cut and we needed to modify the image, and we were able to, in visual effects, take out a problem. In a way, I think the story of the film and how clearly and articulate it is as much a product of the Daniels writing as it is them working with post-production in order to help tweak out and make the story as clear as possible.
No, that's totally right. I mean, they say that, you make a film, what is it, 2 or 3 times? Once you shoot it, once you write it, then you shoot it, then you edit it. Well, in this case, post-production is also playing a big part in that. I wanted to ask a little bit about, the logistics of actually working with the assets, because one of the things that we hear a lot about is, you need a lot of power to move big assets around, especially on a feature film. So can you talk a little bit about like the nitty-gritty of how on a budget you were managing to keep a team together working on a project of this size effectively?
Get ready for controversy. Zach, do you want to start?
Oh yeah, no, of course. I don't know if this is going to be controversial or not, but it is what it is. I think ultimately it was just, recognizing the resources that we had and knowing that we needed to like work at the level that we were capable of and not try to go too big with anything. I think logistically it was something where we were like, okay, yeah, sure, there might be a right way of doing this if you're working on a feature film, but it used to be that the right way of cutting a film was like not in Final Cut, and it was looked down upon. And so we were, and we never really cared about that side of things. Like I care a lot about keeping things organized and efficient and making sure that things are actually going to get done. But I think because we've all worked in music videos and had to do it ourselves, there was this idea of like, okay, well, like we don't ever shoot raw, we just shoot and then transcode to ProRes, and then like that's always looks good enough for us. And so we ended up doing some tests, and instead of dealing with EXRs or DPXs, we're just like, okay, let's take a look, do some tests. Yeah, is a ProRes 4x4 look exactly the same visually as this other thing? Yes. After we run it through all this stuff, does it look the same? Yes. Then let's do that. It's smaller file sizes. It's much easier for us to work with. And file sizes were an issue because we were all remote. Originally, we were going to be all in the same room, but then COVID happened. So we're like, all right, this has to all be remote workflow. And so what we ended up doing, I'll try to keep this short on the tools that we used, but I wanted to make sure that, so basically we wanted to have originally, when we were all going to be together, some sort of network attached storage to be able to all access everything at the same time. So I ended up working with Ashish, our assistant editor, who was the visual effects assistant editor, who also then became the assistant editor later in the process. Amazing. We worked together to figure out, like, we used Resilio Sync, which is like a peer-to-peer file transfer thing that allowed us to basically have clones of hard drives that we'd all have. And they were just 8 terabyte hard drives, like not good hard drives. We're talking like low RPM, but it worked for us syncing things back and forth. And so everyone had a copy of all the same stuff to start. And then Resilio Sync would make sure that everything stayed up to date. So we basically have a workflow where you'd pull down from your hard drive that you had attached to your computer that was basically linked to everyone else's, the assets that you needed. You'd work on a faster internal working drive on your computer. And then whenever you were ready to send something to everyone, you would upload just that thing. It wasn't like you were keeping your project files on there or anything. It was, okay, this is ready to share. This goes back up, and that allowed us to keep our file sizes down and not just balloon, because everyone had, I think if everyone had shared everything that they had, it would have gotten crazy. But everyone only had the things that they were working on, and so that made their internal drives bigger, whatever. So we used that. We ended up using Airtable for shot tracking, and it was a spirit of very open access to everything. Like I wanted to, because we had a small number of people and everyone was trusted, everyone has access to everything at all times. It was very open. It was very like as secure as our network was, but it was easy for us to say, oh, I'm going to hand you this thing that I was working on, and now you can work on it because you have everything. You don't need anything else because you already have it. And you can see everything that's been done on it. You can see the history of these things. So there was ResiliaSync was a big tool. We ended up using Frame.io for reviews, but it was really just using basically, you know, the continuation of like prosumer technology, things that were off the shelf available, using that to like kind of kludge together into this bespoke thing that just worked for us. It's not the type of thing that would work for I think most productions, but we just figured out what worked for us, and that was kind of it, and just had very specific plugins that we were using, and didn't really stray beyond those bounds. If there was something that we felt like we needed, we'd figure out how to introduce that into our workflow. But yeah, it was very unique. I don't know if that answers the question or if there was more to it.
No, I think that does. And a follow-up question to that is the workflow that you guys put in place, where for the most part, if I understand correctly, the artists started and finished that shot. So you started and finished whatever you started working on. Was that always the idea at the beginning, or did that come out of necessity?
It was kind of always the idea. That's kind of always how we've done it in the past. You know, we all tend to work as individual visual effects artists who are just handed something and told, do this thing, finish it, figure it out. So that was mostly the case. There were a few instances where you'd have an asset that needed to be developed and shared from someone else. So we would have, you know, assets that were shared across individuals, or like, you know, someone would do some keying in Roto and then like hand that off to someone else for their project. And then every now and then there would be a case where someone would be the owner of a shot, and then there would be this idea of building upon that and saying like, oh, let's do this, but can I try something on that? I want to, or knowing each other's specialties, being like, you know, if I was working on something and I thought, okay, I need this to do something else, but I'm not the best person for that, then I could just say, hey, Ethan, can you like take this and like really, you know, like style this up? So like the multiverse map stuff is a good example where I do a lot of the initial rough stuff in Illustrator and have those files and do the general animation, but then it needed the aesthetic pass and I hand that off to Ethan to do that. And the same with like, you know, things, I think the hallway shots were another thing where I kind of started some of those shots. And I was like, generally, this is kind of like how I'm thinking it will work. And then I was like, Jeff, can you like do this now? Because I don't have time for this. And you're really good at this.
But we did actually get to a great point of collaboration, because even though we had started with individual artists working on shots, we quickly realized that we could pass shots to each other. Everyone could imbue it with their own style or technique. And then that became a tool for us taking on the climax of the film, in which the bagel is in the IRS building, spoiler alert. So we had done concept art, and I had done some moving tests for what that could look like, but it really became the final version when the four of us would each assembly line and sort of exquisite corpse style add our component to a shot, pass it to the next person who would then add, for example, the papers, pass it to the next person who would then add the distortions and morphing and stretching, pass it to the next person who would then make it look properly lensed by Larkin or adjust the lighting. So I guess I'll punctuate just by saying by the end of the film, we had found this wonderful collaborative process in which the shots were becoming more than the sum of their parts.
I wanted to ask a little bit about prioritizing shots, because clearly you had a certain amount of time to finish the movie. Like it had to be done by a certain point. And the general rule is sometimes you can be tinkering right until the day that it's delivered. So can you talk a little bit about, you know, with I think it was over 500 shots to deliver, how did you start sort of prioritizing what you could and would be spending more time on, and shots that maybe, you know, they still need to get done, but maybe not to the same level of finish?
Yeah, I think this is where music video background and the, working with Daniels and their style comes into play. It's more about telling the story than it is about technical perfection. And so we had a bit of a motto, which is everything has to get to 80%. And if it doesn't get beyond that and it works in the movie, who cares? So there'd be, and because it's that last 20% that is often the most time consuming when you have to like get in and really refine and tinker and like do all these little things. And so I was very, very focused on that. And there would be times when, a shot would come in and we'd want to keep working on it and be like, nope, not going to keep working on this right now. Got to go on to the next thing. We'll come back to this if we have time. And that way of thinking about things, it can be hard when you really want to do your best work, but then at the same time, you have to look at it in the sense of, well, what is this doing in the film? How does it play in the cut? Is this something that really matters compared to this other thing that is a very high priority emotional beat? So in terms of prioritization, it was always prioritizing the big ticket items that had some sort of an emotional component to it, or something that really needed to communicate a particular feeling in that moment of the film. And a lot of that was determined by, what Dan and Daniel were asking for on certain shots. If there was something that was a high priority, then we would get more notes. But there were also times when I think, I did have to, get notes back and basically say, we are not going to do this. We are going to come back to this if we have time. And it would always be something that was confirmed. If it was really important to them, then it would get done. But there were times when, I remember some stuff on the Rock universe where, Dan would have some notes and I was like, this is going into the wish list item. And we ended up developing that where, sometimes a note would come in and I would say, is this a real note or is this a wish list note? And a lot of times, some things would go into the wish list, and that, they needed to, because if we had tried to like do all those things, then we wouldn't have gotten to some of these other more important things. So it was a dynamic process for how to prioritize things, but ultimately it was, does it look good enough to go in the movie? Yes, then let's move on to the next thing. And then we would come back to shots a lot. But it was very much a, where are we right now? How much have we spent? How much time do we have left? Is this worth spending more time on, or are there other places where it matters more? So it was just trying to take that kind of, 30,000 foot view of the project and being like, where do we need the most help? And so let's try to focus our energy in there, as opposed to really getting tunnel vision and being like, but this little pixel can go there. Like there's many frames on this movie where if you just pause on a single frame, you'll be like, what's going on there? But that's not the point. You don't want to do that. You want to watch it, enjoy it.
As artists, like visual artists, perfection is something that we always think about. Like you want to get it as perfect as possible. Mm-hmm. Is your background as filmmakers and storytellers, do you think, helpful in kind of letting go and focusing more on that big picture?
Yes. There is no perfection. There's perfection through imperfection. And one thing that we're skirting around but haven't quite talked about was we look down the path to the finish line, which is the image that goes up on screen or the image that you see on a Blu-ray, which is actually of a lower, I'll say, quality than as you're working with the highest quality materials. So there was a point where we were able to, with some of our trickery we cooked up to make everything look properly lensed and match Larkin's choices, we got to a point where you could be so attenuated to know that small little thing will not be perceivable down the road, so it's nothing to worry about. I mean, there were some shots where no one would approve them. We would work on a shot and no one would believe that this matte painting could go up on screen, or that bagel seed was in the right place. And it would go forever with everyone just trying to figure out what was wrong. And then I'd suggest, let's add a little chromatic aberration because that's absent from the image and it's in Larkin's lenses. And then that would go up on screen, they view it in color, and they go, oh my God, the problem is gone. So part of the magic trick and the controversy that I was speaking to earlier was you don't have to go so robust and so crazy detailed. You really need to just think about the image at the end, how it will be projected or shown, and you can calibrate your brain to deliver good work that would look very realistic within those parameters.
The more movies you make, and if you've been on a set, like Ethan, if you production design something, you're not going to spend a ton of time on the wallpaper in the far back of the set. It's just, you know, your vision, sort of, your perception is sort of tuned into, okay, what are the important elements, and what's going to be background, or, you know, what, and oftentimes that's where so many hours and labors can be saved. And when, you know, sometimes I watch other VFX breakdowns and they start building a world, and then the world is scaled down and it just ends up being a tiny pixel in the background of something, and it's like, what? Somebody spent hours building this thing and lighting it, and it's like, what? Why? What? And I think because we've all made movies from the ground, soup to nuts, as directors, DIY, we kind of know that the same applies to visual effects.
I wanted to get from each of you an idea of, for you specifically, so Ethan, Zak, Jeff, what was the most challenging scene that you worked on? And how did you ever overcome whatever challenge that scene brought to you?
Ethan, you go first, and then Jeff, and I'll go last.
So I guess we had put a lot of time into what we call the bagel reveal, which is the first time we see the bagel in Temple of the Bagel. We go through Joy and Evelyn's hands, the curtains part, and there is the bagel. So this had a lot of challenges. One, it's sort of an introduction of an important character, so you really want to get the design language right. And two, the script was incredibly bare bones. There was no description. It was sort of the curtains part, and there's a bagel, and it's black. So you know, the original budget was so modest that it wasn't planned to have rounds and rounds of design. And I needed to come up with ways where I could bang out images, get them to the directors, have a round of 20 questions to kind of figure out what they needed, and then design these 3 complex shots. I guess I won't go into all the details, but the first half of working on those shots, no one could quite be pleased. And then the second half, we committed to making some drawings, some tests, speaking directly with the Daniels to really understand what it was that they wanted. And it just came into being a wonderful moment. I would call that, again, sort of a shot with a learning curve, where we figured out what was the best approach to get these shots sufficiently designed and put together. I won't go into details, but you could spend a month or 2 designing a big effect shot. That's not unusual. We did not allocate those resources, so these things had to happen very fast.
For me, the most difficult sequence or shot was towards the end, when they are fighting close to the bagel, and when the moment comes up where Evelyn and Joy are standing in the parking lot, and it's all going towards this emotional climax between mother and daughter, and Joy steps backwards into the bagel as they keep cutting back to the IRS building. So there's that moment where she disappears into the bagel, and it was all blue screen behind her, and and because it was such an important beat emotionally in the movie, like you can't show up with a bad VFX that's gonna ruin the moment and drag attention to itself. So it took a while to get it there, and it was something where of all the shots that I worked on, I think it was the one that I felt the most pressure on because of that. And it wasn't getting there right away. It took many iterations. And I remember we did like a screening of the movie and most everything worked. But when that shot came up, it's like a couple of shots where she's in front of the, like getting absorbed by the bagel. And it's something about like the how she was being absorbed by it. It didn't work right, or it didn't look good. It stuck out like a sore thumb. And I came home from, you know, that screening and I was like, yeah, I gotta back to the drawing board. I had to, you know, I think we ended up with 38 revisions of that shot until it was passable. I think what's in there now works. Like I was relieved when the next time I saw it and I forgot about it. Like I watched it, and it's always a good sign when you kind of forget you did the VFX on a shot or something, and it's just like it washes over you.
Yeah, for me, it was less of a particular sequence and more just the, you know, learning how to do the job and do it well, and learning how to manage the resources and the time, and, you know, be a good advocate, supervisor, manager of the process for everyone involved. I think that, you know, it was, you know, everyone will agree, I think, that, you know, I was a little more strict early on and a little more like very focused and anxious about it, just because, you know, it was a new process and it was something where it's like, you know, I felt like the weight of it was on my shoulders. But, you know, that's another nice thing about working with friends. Like, they'll forgive when, you know, I get a little too, you know, focused on something, or get a little too harsh about something, because it's all coming from a place of just personal fear and anxiety about being able to pull it off. Because it's like, the last thing I want to do is, you know, be tasked with this responsibility and you know, fail and not live up to the expectations that I have for myself, that you know, that the Daniels had for me in that process. But I think that, you know, I think we got into a good groove by the end of it, and the fact that we're all still friends and, you know, working together still, I think is a testament to, you know, how it did end up working out, even though there were bumps along the way. So I think, yeah, that was, you know, the whole thing was the hardest thing for me. I can't really pin it to one particular sequence, because, you know, I feel an ownership over all the sequences, and, you know, because I was the one who was, you know, tasking everyone with what needed to get done and how it got done, which wasn't always the right way. And, you know, we just had to figure it out. So yeah, that was it for me.
I think one of the things that's really interesting that's become apparent over the course of the last year since the film has been out and now is, you know, a big Oscar winner. And one of the conversations that kind of started early on is how this is a different approach to making movies. And you guys as filmmakers, I mean, you've been making movies like this for a long time, just not at this level of visibility, I guess is maybe not the correct term, but kind of is, because all of a sudden you have this little movie that could, right? It comes out, you always want to do your best work and put out, you know, something that people will enjoy and that looks great. But all of a sudden you have millions of eyeballs kind of nitpicking everything that you've done. Can you talk a little bit about that realization? I'm assuming that this might not have been something that you were expecting when you signed on to the project, and how this experience has changed, or how you think, one, how it's changed you and how you approach your work, and how you think it's changing or like moving the meter on how VFX in movies, big movies, is just looked at now, because I think this has been a shift.
I think each generation of filmmakers creates their own tools and workflow, and it kind of just follows that generation. So if you came up in the 70s, you were using certain tools and certain approaches that were at the time kind of groundbreaking. And, you know, we were not making music videos the way that music videos were made in the 1990s. We came up with our own tools and workflows and ways of doing things. And I just think that that this film is exemplary of what is possible today in these times. Wasn't possible a decade or two ago. You couldn't have done this movie this way. And now it is a style of filmmaking that will probably just mark this decade, and other filmmakers will be able to use the same workflow and tools to make their own films. I joke that it is like Avatar 2. You know, it is another film that could not have been made just a few years ago. And it's sort of the product of the technologies and prosumer technologies available today. Slightly different budget than Avatar 2. But it's still a sign of the times. As for everybody seeing the film and how I feel about that, we actually had internally, I don't know who's going to come forward and say it, but nervous moments wondering, like, is the work going to go up on screen and be good enough? And we got to a point, I certainly did, where said, you know, I believe in the story this film is telling. I've seen the cut. I know how it arrives at this wonderful ending. I know what it's trying to communicate. So no matter what happens, we're just going to go in and make it communicate. And I'm going to live with the consequences of those choices. And I was totally ready for the film to be either hated or forgotten or discovered later on by college kids. But I did get to a point where I was absolutely comfortable with the choices and could live with them and fine with whatever anybody has to say about it.
Yeah, I think we, you know, part of the way that we have approached things in the past and even on this, it's always like trying to make the most out of the resources that we have. And, you know, all the, you know, Jeff alluded to it earlier, but it's just, you know, using visual effects as a way to, like, we're striving to make something look more cinematic or more professional, or just, you know, to live up to the standards that we see in some of these, you know, bigger productions. Because I think that was, I mean, I remember in college being like, oh, how do we get this to look more like a real movie? And I think that visual effects were a way of that. And in some ways, like, we're still doing that. We're like, well, we don't have the resources of these big movies. So how do we get it to look like one of these big movies? And I think that what we've done here is not, it's not going to be the new way of doing things. It's just going to be another tool and another way of doing things. And it's not, I wouldn't even say it's like the best way of doing things if you have the resources to do it in another way. But like, if you don't have the resources and you're willing to, like, put in the effort, and but there's a reality that, you know, you have to have already built that community beforehand. Like, you can't just go into a project and be like, oh, I'm going to do this the way that they did on Everything Everywhere. Let me just, like, go and, like, figure out, I'll just get some random freelancers and all of a sudden, like, we're going to make the next Everything Everywhere. Like, that, it doesn't work like that. Like, we've been doing this together for 10 years. And so it's, you know, there's a lot of trust, and you have to really want it. Like, it was like, this thing burned me out real hard, but, you know, I did it because, you know, these are my friends. You know, I'm not gonna just say, like, screw it, I don't care, like, I'm tired, I'm quitting, you know, like, that was never an option for me. And so I think that it's to see what's happened has been incredibly cathartic in a way, because it's, you know, it's not just a win for Dan and Daniel, it's a win for all of us, because it's like we built this community together. And I think that, you know, I was talking with these guys about it afterwards, but like, especially after, like, the Oscars, it's, you know, this thing where it's this validation of the way that we've done things, and, like, approaching things not with, you know, a sense of, you know, just, you know, this cutthroat thing. It's more of like, no, let's support each other. Let's, you know, let's help each other out, even when we're competing on things. Like, it was crazy. And in the music video days, we were literally competing with each other for, like, the same jobs, but it was I never got the sense that we were, you know, angry if one of our friends got the job. It was always like, oh, great, you got the job, at least one of us got it, you know. And so I think that we just yeah, it's so all these eyeballs, like, it didn't really matter, you know. We were hoping that, you know, it would do well, but yeah, we all thought it was going to be polarizing for sure. So to see all the critical acclaim, it's kind of magical. It's just this bizarre reality that we're in, and I'm just grateful for it.
It's also given me like more confidence in my skills and abilities that I previously I always feel like, yeah, because I know what I'm doing is cheating. Like I'm the illusion, as an illusionist, you know, you're cheating. And so with that knowledge of cheating, that you're like doing something, tricking people, you feel like something is, you know, you shouldn't get away with it and whatever. And you know, that it feeds into your imposter syndrome, and it becomes this weird feedback loop. But yeah, seeing how well the movie did, and having been part of it, like it's sort of like it for a moment let me see that, you know, it is actual work, and it is like something that took years to, you know, to develop these skills and acquire all this knowledge of like how things work, you know, and it does feel like a payoff, you know, and in that sense I'm very happy, and I'm very proud of what we did.
I wanted to ask you guys about Pretend VFX, and if you could talk a little bit about this sort of next step in your career working together and making films, because this feels like a natural extension of what's been happening for the last 10 years. Can you elaborate a little bit more about the concept for launching the studio and sort of the work that what you're looking to bring to the work?
It's funny to call it a studio, because originally we were, you know, none of us wanted to, you know, own a visual effects company. That was, you know, like none of us wanted to be visual effects artists. So the idea of like having a visual effects company was this very strange thing, at least for me. But originally we were thinking, you know, it was more out of necessity. It was like just the story of our lives, basically. We were getting hit up for a bunch of random stuff after the movie came out individually, because I mean, you look at the credits and there's no like name of a studio. It's just this tiny number of people, like, and so we just individually you know, people would find our email addresses and send us stuff, and we thought, you know, let's turn this into something where we can just have one place where we can say, just email this account, and then we can, you know, all look at it and decide, you know, who wants to do it. And it was, you know, I don't know if that's a thing really, but it was kind of like this idea that, you know, whoever wants to take it can take it. If multiple people want to work on it together, they can work on it together. It's more of the spirit of collaboration, less of competition, because in theory we are competing for jobs and money. There's an amount of money that is available, and, you know, that's it. But, you know, I think that we've recognized that we are, like Ethan has said, we're greater than the sum of our parts is greater than like the individual, or whatever that phrase is.
Oh, no.
And so I think that we just decided, let's do this thing. It's just going to be a collective. And now it's, as of yesterday, I think we're officially a company, Pretend Creative LLC. And we just, you know, it's all these things out of necessity, just trying to have something where we can work together and continue doing the types of things that we're doing, and bring all the experiences that we have, and just working on projects that we want to work on, or projects that we feel are going to be good for us to learn something from. Like we're pretty selective about things, and we're, you know, it's just 4 of us at the moment, and then we have our trusted team that we're having help us with certain things. But the main idea is, you know, not every production has all the money in the world to spend, and so they need help with some things, and we can provide that with less overhead than a lot of places, and a slightly different way of looking at things. And I think taking that idea of, you don't have to have everything technically perfect. You don't have to have everything be something where you can like crank up the gamma and look at like a small corner of the screen and be like, this pixel is like not the correct, you know, whatever they do. It doesn't matter for most productions, and it doesn't help tell the story in a lot of instances. So I think that that's kind of where we shine, where we can come in and bring a different perspective and help not only with actually doing visual effects work, but also just creative consulting on some things where, you know, something isn't working, or they don't have enough money, and, you know, the director's not happy or something like that. And we can figure out that more holistic approach to how to help filmmakers tell their stories in the way that they want to tell it without having to go through this very rigid structure that's very impersonal.
Well, guys, congratulations. The film speaks for itself and the work speaks for itself. So I can't thank you enough for making the time to speak with us today, give us some more insight on the project and how it all came together. And best of luck. I can't wait to see what you guys bring to us next. I expect it's going to be more eyeball popping stuff.